Okay, and so before we cover what we plan to cover today, I just want to mention this error. And if you remember, that's the problem we had when we do the demo during the last lecture. And so this is the front-end code. And then when we try to do that, and we also receive some error, something similar to this. The important is this part, and the access control allow origin. So in the lecture, we mentioned some method, but that didn't quite work. So to solve these problems, and really you need to change not to a front-end code. The front-end code is fine. You can still use fetch like this, and it's more on the back-end part. And so maybe a little bit of background. And so this is actually a safety feature from the browser. So what it meant is it does not allow you to, or does not allow a program to access data from a different server than where the program is loaded. That's what it meant. Okay, and so in our case, even you have different port numbers, it will assume it's a different server. Okay, and so the reason they have this is to prevent you from running, or potentially from people creating the program running malicious code from an untrusted server. So basically, if it's something from a different server, that means when you load the code from the current server, it has no control of the code from other servers, so it can be potentially unsafe. Okay, so the solution to this is actually, there are many different solutions. And the one we did in the last week, let me see if it's still there. Let me open the examples from last week. Okay, let me see. Okay. The text is probably too small. And so hopefully you can see it now. Or maybe this will be easier to see. Or okay, let me just make it a full screen. And let me know if the text is a bit too small. So this is the front end, which is very similar and to the one we were shown in the slides, which is this one here. So this part is essentially this part here. From here to here, that's the fetch, the front end doing the fetch. Okay, and this is the back end. So what we did is actually we tried this. So this is one of the possible solutions. It says, and we can set the header, and we said access control allow origin, and then we say star. Star basically means everything, and it will allow any origins. That means any server it would allow. But from what I think we tried it in last week, that didn't quite work, and we still getting this error here message. Okay. So the other option, as we're going to be covering today, let me see, did I have it here? No. Is another option is to use this module, so which is actually part of the Express to handle this problem. Okay, and then just as any other modules, and you need to know the modules, you first have to install it. And so what you need to do is run npm install. So we have done this, say, for Express and other modules we need. And so this one is just called the course. Actually, the course just stands for cross original some restrict access or something. So that's exactly what the arrow is for. And then what you need to do, and you need to load this module in your code. And this is just as you load any other modules. And so if we look at it here, and you would do, say, require express, and similar here, we can require course. So that's the modules. So in this case, I already installed the, have done the npm install already. Okay, and then one last part we need to do is run it or use it. So this is the use it also, if you remember, and the app. So the app here will be the Express app, and then .use will be use it as a middleware. That means it's going to be used every time, and then use course. Okay, so this is a slightly shorter hand. So you would see, for example, when we use Express, we will first require it, and then say we'll make an app, and that's called Express. Run basically Express as a function. And similar here, you can say a constant course equal to course. You can do something like this, constant course equal to course. And then you can do, say, app.use course here, something like this. So this is like a slightly shorter hand way. So you just run the course inside function in here directly, and you say .app.use and use it as a middleware. Okay, and then once you have that, so that should solve this and the problems we saw here, and this access control allow origin error. And as I said, this is not the only solution. There's other solutions as well. So if we try it again now, so if we go back here, and if we start the server, let me see what it is. Yeah. And did we talk about npm start yet? Can't remember now.
No, I don't think so.
And can anyone tell me, have we talked about npm start yet? Or
yeah. I think we have.
Yes.
Yes, we have.
Sorry?
Yes, we have. I think.
Okay. In this case, let me see. Yeah, okay. In this case, I haven't set the start script here, so I'm still gonna be just using Node. And so I will just run the server, which is called the route.js. Okay, and I didn't say anything here, so it shouldn't have given me any message and displayed here, but the server is running. So what I'll go do is I'll go back to the browser. If I exit here, and then I can access, and I forgot now. What is the port number? Yeah, 3000. So I type in localhost 3000, and it will give me error message, say file not found, which actually means it is correct. So basically, I have two. So I have this get route here, and only if I type in localhost/Olivia, it will send this message. Otherwise, it will come to here, which is a middleware, and it will just say it's file not found. Okay, and it didn't give me any error message here, so I'm not having. If I just right click and show the console. Oh, okay. And in this case, I still have some errors, but you can see, and it tried to load the favicon.icon, which is the icon which will show up in the browser type here. And by default, Chrome will look for that, but we don't have this allow origin error anymore. And if I type in Libya, yeah, and then it should give me this message, and which is exactly what we would expect from the here. So say when you use a get / Olivia, and we will send you back this text message. Okay. Again, so there's no errors here. That means we fixed that. Allow origin error. Okay. And so basically, so this is one of the solutions. So this seems to be the more robust ones compared to, say, manually setting that in the code, like the one we changed here. Say the set header, access allow origin. Sometimes it just didn't work either. I don't know, not clear exactly why. And so this is a more robust solution, and just install this module and then just run required, basically load it in the code, and then just use this as a middleware. And you probably want to put this as the first middleware in your code. So don't have anything else before that, because that needs to be run first before it's processing any other request. Otherwise, if you put it after, for example, if you put after the get here, and it will try to process this request route, and it will give you the error. Okay. Okay, and also, and I mean, actually, this is, there are many parameters actually you can set with the course module. And this is one we're not setting anything, and just use the default setting. And that's allows you to basically access any other servers, and which will be convenient when we write the code, but can be potentially unsafe. And so if you want to use it properly, for example, if you want to write any production code, or you want to put the code, and you want to actually set the module properly, and in which case there's more document on the Express and web page. So we will, I mean, this is beyond what we're going to be able to cover in this module. But if you just Google and Express course, and so you'll go to this page, and it will tells you exactly how to use it. And this is how we use it here. And we just require it and then just run it. But you can configure the course. And in many other ways, you have different options how to use it. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna come back to the lecture. Okay, now we can actually starting what we plan to cover this week, and which is about REST APIs and the MongoDB. And so we already talked about using Express to set up and different route. And so that's basically how we're going to set up and how or create the REST API. And the API will be used to access the database. In this case, we're going to be using MongoDB. And the main reason is, I assume most of you, if not all of you, used the MongoDB before. So we're not going to cover too much. I'm going to actually just show you the steps about actually using an online version of MongoDB. So you're going to be hosting the MongoDB on a server in the cloud. So you don't need to set up anything. So you will not have any issues in terms of running local MongoDB driver issues, anything like that. But that also means it will allow you to run your final app online. Doesn't have to be run on your computer, so other people can access it as well. Okay, and so first a little bit concept or background. So the API stands for Application Programming Interface. And so it's the opposite will be the graphical user interface. So that's the interface designed for people like us to use the software. Okay, and then so some of these tools we use, for example, like a Git and Node, and they also have a user interface. but it's called the command line for interface, and it doesn't have any particular graphics, mostly only text-based. Okay, and so the API, as I said, it stands for an application programming interface, and so it allows the programs or the softwares to talk to softwares. Okay, and the graphical user interface is designed for users or people or humans talk to software. And the API is designed for software talk to software. Okay. And so it doesn't have to be something visual at all, because the software cannot really see. All they need to be able to just to send and receive data, and that's all they need. Okay. And so this exists on your own computer, on a computer, for example, and the games. And if you run the games on a computer, it needs to actually talk to the API provided the graphics driver. So you would have a graphic card in your computer, and you want to use the features in the graphics card to make the game run faster. Then you'd have to use the graphics driver API to use its functions. Okay, and in our case, the API going to be run on the server, the Node.js server, the things we have been running so far, and then we will code, and from the client side, which is the front end, which is the code you wrote in HTML, like something like the fetch, it will try to talk to the server to get data or receive data. And this is what the API we will do. Okay, and the APIs is language independent. Okay, so we said, and the API gonna be running on the server, and then the API itself can be created using different languages. And in this module, we're gonna creating the API using JavaScript, and you can use Java or Python or any other languages, and many other languages to create server APIs. And also, and then the front end, when you need to contact the API, in our case, we're going to, for example, retrieve data or save user information, etc. When you contact the API, sending requests from the client side, again, it doesn't have to be any particular language. And in our case, we're going to using HTML, JavaScript, but the front end, if you have a Java front end, Python front end, or some other languages, it also will be working with the API. All you need to do is be able to send, say, an HTTP request, either GET, for example, to a particular server. So long as the language can do that, then you can use that to create the front end as well. So basically, the client and server side, there's no restriction on what language to use, and they don't have to be the same. And in this module, we just choose to use JavaScript on both the client and server side, so we don't have to introduce different languages. Okay. Yeah, and so you can have a server which run Node.js and creates its own API, and then different front end can communicate with that. So it can be JavaScript, can be Java, Python, C, or some other languages. So long as they can send a request to a server, that will be fine. Okay, and this is a very simple API examples. And this is example and using JSON. Again, so the way you communicate with this API has to be defined by the API. So it can use JSON, could use some other data format, and this will be decided by the server side, which creates or maintains the API. Okay, and this API would take an input, so it knows a time zone. So this one says, this will be the West Coast of America or US, and then return the current time. So something like this. This is a very old example, it's 2015, and that's the year, month, and date, and then the exact time. And then So the actual API request, so when you're accessing the API or sending a request to the API, you would, and before the slash, you will type in the server address. I don't know, maybe www.time.timezone.com, and then followed by a query string like this. So this is how you pass information to the server, say, and I want to get the time. That time zone is equal to American, the West Coast time in the US. So you need some way to tell the server and the information required to retrieve the data. Okay, and again, so this format will be decided by the API itself. So when you're creating the API, you'll decide what is the format people can send you the time zone specification. And so any request which does not follow this particular format, and the server will not be able to understand, then they will not be able to send the correct time back. Either get an error message, or more specific one says, and the query string is not recognized, or something like that. And if you send the correct ones, it will send back a result or response. And in this case, will be in JSON format. And again, it doesn't have to be in JSON format, it can be just simple text or XML or some other formats. Again, it's decided by the server side, the API itself, and it contains the time and the time zone. Okay, and so again, just to confirm the kind of reiterate what we said before, and to use this API, the front-end code and can run on any platforms, can be a phone, can be a computer, can be a tablet, can be a smart TV, anything, and or maybe one of these sensors or smart sensors which has some internet connection. And so long as they can communicate an API and pass and JSON. So communicate with API means they can send a request, HTTP request to the server, and they can pass JSON in the sense they be able to understand the result sent back from the server. So the server will return something like this, and the client should be able to process JSON file. Otherwise, this information is not useful. Okay, and for us, and one of the example, we can build a web page, and which will send a fetch request to the server, and then you'll get the JSON back, and you can pass it and display, which will be very similar to the examples we showed before. If we can go back to, let me see, maybe the first slide. Okay, and so this is, if you look at this one, this is the fetch examples we used before. Here, we say the response.text, and because we know the sending back is just a text string or a string or text, so we can just use text, and then we can display it. And if you know the response is going to get back, it's a JSON file, you just need to say response.json, and you can do something very similar here. And you can say function text. So it will pass it as a JSON file, so as a JSON object, and display it. Okay, let's go back. Done this part. Okay. Okay, doesn't want to go full screen. Okay, and you can also build a simple and mobile applications, and which are send a request to the same API, the server, pass the result and display. So you can see this is the front end web page, and which will send the request and then pass the result and display on the page. Obviously, you need to extract a little bit of information, for example, the time zone, and then convert the time into a format that's more readable to most of the users. And you can write an app. And again, this one doesn't have to be in JavaScript. And this can be, for example, in Java or in Objective-C or Swift, something. And it will display the same information on the app. Okay, so that's the concept of the API. And the important part is to understand, and so long as you can access a server, and the front end can be in any language. And as I said, and the response doesn't have to be JSON, and it can be XML, plain text format, or any other predefined data format. That will be fine. And in our examples, we're going to be using JSON, and because it has the best, it will work very well with Express, and also because we're using Node.js, and also front end using JavaScript. And so they work the JSON is native to JavaScript in the sense it's part of JavaScript specification. Okay, and so we're gonna starting to see some simple examples of the APIs creating using Express. As I said, it will receive a request and pass it. And here, pass it basically means you're gonna extract the additional information from the request. So far, we haven't done that yet. We just say if you have say localhost 3000 and /Oliver, we'll send back a text, but we didn't get any information from the request. And whereas say in this example here, so we need to get the information from the text string to know, okay, we need to extract the time zone information, which should be American and Los Angeles. That information from the request string, and use that to retrieve the right information. So that's something we haven't covered yet, and which we will do. So that's the parsing part. And finally, we'll send some response. And basically, if we pass the request and the request is correct using the right format, then we should be able to send a correct response object. And this will be in JSON format. And potentially, for example, the request does not follow the correct format, then we will not be able, maybe we'll, instead of sending a JSON object, we'll send error message back, etc. And with an HTTP status code, and whether it's correct or error. If it's error, what type of error? Okay, we're going to using middleware and the routing to receive requests and then passing them. Passing them basically means almost like do some processing of the request string to extract some information, which is actually not that difficult. Okay, so one of the example and a very simple API and is just generate some random integers, random numbers. Okay, and so when you're sending the request to the API, you need to including a minimum value and a maximum value, and then the service and would then generate a random number between these minimum and maximum values and send back, and the result will be sent back as a JSON. Okay, so as usual, and when we created the backend, we need a package.json file. And for the node.js project, okay, and then the main server file, we might call it app.js or something else, completely up to you. And then you create an Express application inside the app.js. That means you need to install Express and require it in your Node.js code or server, and attach a single route that gives a random number. Okay, and so essentially the request or the API, in this case only one, and is one route, which we already did before, and in terms of showing you how to create a route using app.get. Okay. Okay, and so this is the part I'm gonna starting to do a bit more live coding now. So let's create a project first. Week 12. Okay, and currently it's empty. Okay, so as I said, and one way to create a new project is just to use npm init, and then it will ask you a few questions. And in this case, first one is package name. We're gonna call random number API. Okay, version maybe 0.01. Our first version. We can entry point. Okay, and I think we said we're going to using app.js. No test command, git repository, keyword, author, license, and all these. Okay, and so it's done. Now we have a package.json file. Currently, it's in terms of script. Okay, so we should be using npm start. So we're gonna do start and do node. I needed to add the, so you can see, and there's a little wiggly red line here, and so there's a problem. And as usual, this is a problem, not a problem of this line, and it says the previous line at the end. I need a comma. Yeah, I'm gonna do node more app. Yeah, and so the node mon, if you remember, we covered in the previous lecture. So instead of using node, and this one would automatically restart the server when it detects any changes in the source code. So just a little bit more convenient. And then here we say app because the main here is called app.js. For example, if you here called the server.js, so, and then here you need to call this server. Yeah. Just make sure those two matches. Oh. Okay. And yeah, the other thing now, I need to install Express. And the nodemon is something as a tool which you can install once on your computer. If you install using a global, so when you install, let me clear this. So when you install nodemon, if you say I install something like this, and then you only need to install once, and then you can use it everywhere in all the other node project. Basically, you can type nodemon on command line to recognize and find it. But for the different modules you need, in this case, Express, you can't do that. You have to install every single times. Okay, and then installed, and you can see this part is now automatically added to my package.json file. So this is something I will need. Okay, and so this is the part we have done quite a few times already. So starting, okay. This is the actual code. And so this is the loading of the Express module and then run it. And I think, again, we've done this for a few weeks now. Okay, and so this is the part. Okay, this part you should know, and app.get. So that means we can handling a get request, and /random. So that's a specific file path. Okay, and so that's just similar to say the /Olivia we had in the previous example. Okay, and this is the part that's different. Okay, and this is actually not a path. What it does is says slash and the column min and the column max. So these are actually the two parameters. So what what the code actually expects you is to type something like makes it bigger, say local host and 3000, and to access this API or express route, you're supposed to type random /5 and 10. Okay, so the 5 will be the minimum here, and the 10 will be the maximum here. So basically, the column here just defines whatever follows it is actually a parameter you expect to get from the user or the request string. So that's the main new thing. Okay, and then you can do this, and you can say request. So this is the request object, and this is response, which will be empty, and you will add things to that. And you say request dot parameters. Again, so this is a predefined object inside the request object, and it will get it's installed. No, not installed. It will store all the parameters from the string. So in this case, we will have two parameters because these are the min and max have these columns in front. So it knows these are the two strings, and it will automatically extract them. So all you need to say is just to say request, which is this request, params. So it's a shorter for parameters dot min, and this will give you the values whatever user typed here, or that part of the request string. Okay, and then by default, everything is string, but this is not what we want, and so we use parseInt. So this is a built-in JavaScript functions, and actually not used special to Node.js. All it does is just change or convert a string into an integer, because that's what we want. So this one would change this into an integer. Okay, and then for example, if user being a bit naughty and is not typing something properly, if something like say something type and a / okay, here the JavaScript will not report an error. It will still try to convert a and the KDH into some numbers. Somehow it will happen, but the result is probably not what you expected. Okay, let's say the user typing the numbers properly, and then it will be changed into an integer, and we give it a name called the min and the max, so it's easier to. Okay, and then here, so is to check whether actual user typed in and say sensible numbers, for example. And again, so this is the built-in function. So it checks if there is a NaN stands for not a number. Okay, so if min, if this variable is not a number, or max is not a number, and you will set the status of the result or the returned object to the user. The status says 400, that's the error code. and then you send the error message, says error bad request. And so you can type any error message here. So this is a generic one, which may be not very specific. And you could also say an error, the message says either the minimum or maximum is not a number. Maybe that will be more useful an error message to the user, but you can type in any request here and return. So this return here would finish or basically stop the function. Okay, so this part will not be run. Okay, and you can potentially add more checks here as well, for example, and you can check if the minimum is actually less than the max. For example, they are both numbers, but if the minimum is greater than max, then you will not be able to generate any random number, and which would say is bigger than the minimum but less than the maximum, for example. Okay, and let's say it is also okay, then you can actually generate the random number. And so, okay, so this is actually the line. Just actually generating this random number only takes one line of code. Okay, it says that's by result mass.round. Okay, and so this dot round, it just round up any real numbers into integers, because in this case we only want integers. We don't want any things after decimal point. Okay, and so what it did here, it says mass.random times max minus minimum. Okay, so mass.random give you a random number between 0 and 1. So it's always not an integer. And it times max minus minimum. So that's the difference between the max and min and minimum, and then plus minimum. And so you can imagine, so depends on the value of this, and if it's equal to 0, and that will give you just minimum, because then this part will be 0. And if this part is 1, and then you can see the max this part, and will equal to max minus min, and then the plus min will give you max value. So any numbers that's between 0 and 1 from here would give you a value between max and minimum. Okay, and that's not the key part. But then you send the result back, and you just say res.json result. So this is a JSON object, and you can. So you have to say results. Maybe you don't even need to. You can use your own keyword. Sorry, and this is like just the key in the JSON object, and the actual number here. Yeah. Okay, let me just quickly check how we are doing in terms of time. Wow. Is it? Ah, looks like we are quite a bit behind already. Okay, yeah, I think we are a little bit already about halfway through, and we only covered maybe 12 slides out of the 40 we need to cover. So I'm not going to type in this whole thing now. The only new thing here is mostly this slash column minimum and the column max. Actually, even forgot the slash. And these are how you define parameters. And then this is how you get the values of the parameters using the request object, and inside using the params object, and then followed by the parameter name. Okay, And then when you need to request anything, and you just type in this, and then followed by this part, which is what we covered before, but then the /10 and the /100, setting the minimum and the maximum number, and it will generate every time you're supposed to give you a different number between those, the minimum and maximum. Okay, and so that's simple examples of a random generator API. And for the APIs, which is usually designed to access database, and the most common operations are called a CRUD, or maybe create, read, update, and delete. That's what they meant for. Okay, and so what they do is, so the create will create or add a new record to the database. Read will be retrieve something from the database. Update will be change the information inside the database. For example, you already had user information, you want to update it, for example, its contact phone number or address. And then delete will be just delete something from the database. Okay, and so this CRUD is quite common ones. And so if we have a photo sharing app, and the API would be, say, for the create part will be the user adding new photos to the server, and user my browser photos, which means retrieve all the photos the user uploaded, and this will be the read. And user can make changes to the photos, for example, make it larger or smaller. And this will be the update, essentially changing a record which is already in the database. And finally, we can delete the photos from the database, and this will be delete. Yeah, so this will be the different types of operations that you will do and through the API to the database. Okay, and again, so this is I'm gonna introduce, this is, I mean, a very important concept, but also can be a little bit confusing. And so this is the so-called HTTP verbs, and or maybe more commonly or more formally known as HTTP methods. And so when you send a request to the server, you actually can send different type of request. Okay, and this type is sometimes called a method or verbs. And then the server will, depends on the type, respond differently. And we have these 4 different ones called get and put, post, and delete. So if you have already guessed that we actually use the get in our creating our express route before, if you remember, we have app.get is actually mapped to these HTTP methods. And also, these 4 are actually maps to the CRUD operation as well. And we're going to cover that more a bit later, which one matched to which. Okay, and so the get is the most common one. And when you send a request to a server in the browser, it's always get. And so, yeah, it's getting information from the server. It does not change the status, yeah. And so one important thing, the get does not change the data, okay? So the get is kind of the equivalent of the read operation for database. So it will retrieve information from the database and display it, but it does not make any changes. Okay, and so the post is usually request a change to the server. Okay, and so that's the equivalent of the update in the CRUD. So basically, there's already a record in the database and you want to make a changes. Oh no, sorry, yeah. Sorry, and scrap that. So post is actually for creating records. So it's the equivalent of create. And so when you need to create something in the database, you send a post request. Okay, and then the put is the equivalent of update. So that's already something in the database and you want to make changes. You would send a put request. Okay, and finally you have a delete. So that's quite straightforward. So that's when you remove something or delete something from a database, you send a delete request. Okay. So for example, we can create a simple Express or not Express server. It has a various API route. So you can say get, post, put, and delete. Yeah. And all it does, so the path is actually, you can see here, it's all the same. But say, and the server will not confuse. So slash means no specific path at all. So only the server IP address or the URL. And or it depends on the request type or the methods. And it will run either of these routes differently. So it depends on the request method or type, only one of these will be run. Okay. And if it's a get request, and it will send this message, you just send a get request. And if it's a post, and it will send you a different message, and same for the put and delete. Okay, so here we haven't actually done any database operation yet, but for example, if it is a real CRUD and API, and then when it's post, it will, instead of send just a message, it will get some information from the URL and create a new record in the database and send some result back, either way the record is created and successfully or not. And different operations for put and delete. Okay. And finally, this part just run the server. Okay. So yeah, that's right. And someone mentioned, so these four, the get, post, and put and delete are 4 HTTP methods or type. They are not the only one. I think in total, there are many more than this, maybe 10 or something. Okay. But we're gonna just use these ones because they are they match with the CRUD. There are quite a few other ones, and we're not gonna cover here. Okay, so again, just because we are running short of time, I'm not gonna type these. I'm gonna just be a little bit lazy. I'm gonna copy these and put them in our server here. Oops. I did not even create the server yet. Let's create app. Is that called app? Yeah, app.js. And I'll put these coding. Okay. So I'm gonna require the express, that's all we need. And this part we created for route. And then here we actually running the server. Okay. And then we can start the server. We'll run, obviously not this one. This is not gonna run here. npm start. Okay, and this is working now. And then I can go back to my server here. I'm going to type in localhost 3000. Okay, and you send back a message. You just send a get request friend, which is what I typed in here. Okay, And then back to the, so all this, you should know well, but the other things is, and we will not be able to test any other HTTP methods in a browser. So in the browser, you can only send a GET request. So that's when you basically, how do I say? In the browser, when you're typing in the URL, and you cannot type the HTTP method, you can't specify whether it's get, put, or delete. And that's not possible because all you can do is only send a GET request in the HTTP. So you don't need to type it. Okay. Whereas in our application, I don't need this or this. So in our application, and because we're talking about API, if you remember, is how do you support the discussion or communication between the programs, so they can actually specify different types. But when you test it manually, that means you need some additional tools to test post and put and delete. Okay, and so this is where curl comes in. And so curl is a command line tools, which actually allows you to send or specify the HTTP method in the request. And we said, and in the browser, you can only do get, you can't do post, put, or delete. And so that's when you need to test other type of requests, you need some other tools. So curl is the command line tools, and I think it comes with Mac, and probably on the Windows, you can also install if it's not come already. Yeah, how we are doing. Okay, so this is the examples. If you want to send something which is not a GET request, okay, and you will say hyphen, which is a parameter. Okay, it has to be a capital X, if I remember correctly. And you said my method is going to be put. So I'm going to send in a request to this, a put request to this server. To this server. Okay, I can demonstrate this quickly and on my computer. So I have I still have the server running here. And I will start a terminal window, command line, make it a bit bigger. Okay, yeah, so I typed in curl. It didn't give me error, say that does not recognize this as a command, so that will be fine. Now we're gonna do this one, curl. Let's try small x and put. Okay, and so this is the server URL. Oh, has to be 3000, one more zero. And this is the type of method, and this is just something you have to put every time if you want to use curl. Okay, and so looks like I have to use capital. It's not okay. So maybe it's not about capital, so have to be capital X. Huh. It didn't get anything. Put. So I should receive a message like this. Okay, let me try again. If I have to put in the capital put, if it helps. Okay, yeah, so it looks like it all has to be capital. So have to be capital X and capital put, which is the HTTP method. And now you get a response back, which is I don't see a lot of put requests anymore, which is exactly the text here. Okay, and similarly, you can do other message, and you can also do get. but which probably is easier to do in a browser. So in browser, you can also do post. Yeah, and so you get here the response for post, and finally you can change this to delete. Then you would get this message for delete. Yeah. Okay, and so this is something you would have to use to test other types of HTTP requests, and besides GET. Okay, and we kind of mentioned this already. And so we mentioned 4 types of HTTP methods. They actually match to the 4 CRUD operations. So the create is post, read is get, update is put, and delete is delete. That's probably the easiest one. So the read is get, and that's also quite easy. And I think sometimes even I got confused, and something fairly easy to look up. Just say the create is for the post is for create, and then put is for update. Okay, and so we're gonna kind of switch topic a little bit now and talk about the MongoDB, and then we're gonna come back to see actually how do we create a more complex version of this, which actually you're gonna, instead of just send back a text, you actually, for example, here you actually retrieve something from the database, send a request to the database, and get the results back and send it back to whoever sent you the request. Okay, and before that, we're going to cover MongoDB. We will not be able to cover everything today, I believe. And so we're going to just cover down MongoDB first, and then try to create the API as much as we can. Okay, I'm going to using MongoDB and for the demonstration, but also for the lecture, but also for the coursework. Okay, and the reason for using MongoDB, and it's designed to handle JSON data, and which works quite easily with all the JavaScript code we are written. Okay, and I think it's covered in the second year web development module, and also so you have some knowledge with it, and it's not the point of this module to introduce any new database. Okay, so we're not going to cover how to use MongoDB, but we will introduce some graphical user interface tools. So even you don't know how to use MongoDB before, you should be able to pick it up very quickly. Okay, and if you need any introduction or how to use MongoDB, and this is the official MongoDB website, and it gives you an introduction to how to use it. It's only a few pages, you can complete it in half an hour or something, which I found a quite good way to know about MongoDB. Okay, so this is kind of part of the review, also part of the maybe a quick introduction to MongoDB. And the first thing you need is a MongoDB server. And the server itself, and think of it as a software, but it doesn't store any data yet. So it's just a software, just like say, and you need Microsoft Word, which is a software to write Word documents. But the software itself doesn't come with any documents by itself. Okay, and then to connect to the MongoDB server, and you need something called drivers. So the drivers basically knows how you can talk to a particular server. And the drivers is usually coming with 4 different languages, for JavaScript, for Python, for Java, for C, etc. And so basically that allows you to access the database and using different programming language, make it a little bit easier. Okay, so we're going to using a driver that's designed for Node. So MongoDB has a driver specific for Node, and it has a JavaScript. So I think, no, it's slightly different. I think it's slightly different. and from the driver for JavaScript. Okay, and actually, once you had a MongoDB server, first you need to create a database. So a database, I don't know, is like a collection of, okay, so assume if you know the relational database, then the database is the same as a relational database, MySQL, for example. And then the collections is equivalent of the tables in the relational database. And here it's called collections. Yeah. And finally, you have documents. So each document, each collection has many documents, and each document is just one JSON object, which will be the equivalent of one row and in the relational table. Or like to talk about a spreadsheet. And maybe the database will be the one spreadsheet file and one Excel spreadsheet file. And then you can have many sheets in Excel spreadsheet. And then each sheet is equivalent of a collection. And then in each sheet, you can have multiple rows. And each row is called a document. And it's called document because each of them is a JSON object. That's why it's called a document. Okay. And so this is maybe another way to show different concept. And the application here will just, this is the MongoDB server. That's the software. And then inside software, you have databases. You can have multiple databases. And for each database, you have multiple collections. And for each collections, you have different documents. Each document is a JSON object. And so maybe we will have a database for our online shops. And inside we'll have collection for products and for users and maybe for orders. And for products, and each document will include information for one lesson or one pet product. And under, let's say, users, and each document will contain the information about one user, their names, address, and phone number, etc. Okay, and in this module, and for the coursework, we're going to use something called the Atlas, and which is the online server, which allows you to run a MongoDB server online. So we're going to just only using the free version, so it does not cost you anything. And the advantage, so you don't need to install Mongo on your computer. So we're not going to provide any code, which, if I remember, has some problems, just depends on, say, whether it's Windows or Mac or different versions. And this is kind of how we use. And so first you have to create an account. And I'm not sure that's still the correct URL. We'll see. Okay, then it still is. Let me do Mango Atlas. Yeah, so, and you can either use the link here, or if you just Google Mongo Atlas and using the first link, and you will be presented with a very similar interface. And if you don't have an account, you need to sign up. Because I think I already have one. I don't remember where I logged in with Google, or let me check. Okay, so I had the one which is okay. Why take a while to load? And while it's loading, I'm sure you can done this many times before. You can use your Google account or use your other email address, completely up to you. Okay, yeah, and you're gonna be present with something similar. Okay. So the actual address for the atlas is just called cloud.mongodb.com. Yeah, that's probably the better URL to use. Yeah, I'm already logged in, so it looks a bit different. And if I log out, will be, when you first create the account, and we're gonna just using this one, and which is the free one. So I think it's completely, and it has limited storage, but more than enough for the coursework. I think it's like a 500 megabyte. Yeah. And then you need to choose, and the machine, again, you will choose the free one, which give you 500 megabyte of storage and very limited and RAM and CPU. But again, for our coursework purpose, it's more than enough. Okay. And then you want to give a name and call the cluster. Okay. So the cluster in theory is a group of servers that you can use. And which means if you run a very large application, even one server is not able to handle it, and you need something called a cluster. But in our case, it will be just a cluster of one computer or one server. That's all we will have, which is completely fine. And just give it a name. Let me see if I can see my cluster. Not sure. I think my cluster is just called the cluster 0, which is a very creative name. Okay, and you give the names and you create a cluster. Okay, and now you see something like this. Okay, and the first thing you need to do is to allow you to access the server. Okay, so by default, it's quite set and safe, so it doesn't allow you to. It has only a specified list of server or IP addresses is allowed to access this. Okay, and so obviously, and you want to add a little bit more, and because you might access the server from different locations, for example, from at the university, at home, at work, or internet cafe or somewhere, and you need to add different IP addresses there for each one of them. And so you go to the network access option or link on the left, and then you choose add IP addresses, which, oh, sorry. Okay, let me see my here. If I click my network analysis, okay, then you can see I add some IP address there. So this one is my work IP address, and this one is my home IP address. I think that's the old one now. Okay, and if you want to find out what your IP address is currently, and if you don't know, and you just type in my IP addresses in Google search, it will tell you here. For example, if I type in my IP address, okay, and it tells you, okay, currently this is my IP address. Okay, and also the difference is, and this is the so-called public IP address. So that's it will say this is the public IP address. So this is what the IP address other computer will see you. Because, for example, if you're at home using a router, your local IP address will be different from the public IP address. And from anyone outside your home, everything is having the same IP address. For example, you have a computer, phone, tablet, all connected to the same router. For anyone outside your home, they all have the same IP address. It's different from your local ones. But anyway, so that will be your address you should use, and add that to the network access part, the network access, and add IP address, add to that. Okay. Okay, and then once you've done that, okay, I'm not sure if I would cover that later. But here you can see what I also added here is this. Added in 0.0.0/0. Okay, and so what does this? That basically means it would allow any IP addresses. That's what it does. Again, it's not very safe, but I mean, it's a bit easier if you know you're not doing anything critical and you don't want. And for example, you know your home IP address is going to change every time you restart the router or connect, and this might be easier because you don't want to do it all the time. So that might be easier. Okay, and once you can connect, and you connect to the server, so you can start actually connecting and creating a database. Okay. If you remember, I can't remember which slide it is now. Okay, so if you remember, and this is the equivalent of the MongoDB Atlas, and then we have to create everything below. It doesn't have, when we create a cluster, we don't have anything of these yet. So we have to first create a database and then create collections and add documents to it. So we're going to start with the database part. Okay, and so MongoDB would ask you to create a domain user, so to just as any other database. And this is like the super user or the root user, which have access to everything about the database. And this will be the person, or this will be the account that can say delete the database. And then type in your username and password and better remember them. And then create a user. Okay. Now you connect the cluster. Okay, I already explained cluster means you have a group of servers in our case, and we only have one because this is the free one. It only has one server, and you connect to it. Okay. And the next part, we're going to choose the option, say, connecting using MongoDB Campus. Okay, MongoDB Campus is a graphical tools that MongoDB created to allow you to manage the database. So essentially, if you want to create database collections or add records, you can do in here rather than have to write code. So this is what we recommended, and just make it a bit easier to do all these things. And if you don't have it yet, and you need to download and install, and it's available on all different operating systems. So here we are showing OS X because I'm using a Mac. And if you're using Windows, I think it has the Windows version, and probably they have a Linux as well. But if you don't have a Linux one, you can find some other GUI or client, graphical user interface client for MongoDB. So you need to download and install it. Okay, so you can see this is the part, and that's very important. So this gives you a string to connect to the MongoDB server. And so basically you download the campus, MongoDB campus, that will be running from your computer, and you want to connect to your database in Atlas using campus, and you need to put in this string here. So I'm hidden my URL here, but this is the one you should copy, and later on after you finish install campus, and you use that one to connect to the MongoDB Atlas from your computer inside the campus. You also need to use the username password you created earlier in this slide, this one here. Okay, and so this is what happens. when you actually install the campus, so this is the interface of campus now. This is not Atlas anymore. So this is running on your computer. And you typed in, you paste in the URL, which was here. And you click connect. And if everything goes well, and you should see something like this. So that means you connect to your database. This is the default database. It has 3 collections created for you: admin, config, and local. And you can click this and see whatever documents is in there, which is the JSON object, or you can click this for deleting those. Okay. And then you can create new databases. If you don't want to use this, just click the create database button, and then you can create a new database. For example, this is for the web store ones, and then click the button. Okay, and that's it. And I'll show you, let me see if I have campus installed. No, not on this computer. Okay, it's gonna take a little bit of time to download and install. But I guess I'll store. Okay. And so someone is asked about Studio 3T or Robo 3T. I think they're the same thing. Yeah. And so there are many other graphical client for MongoDB. And if you don't want to use Campus, and you can use any other ones. So the difference is the Campus is the one created or maintained by MongoDB itself. And so I think the downside is probably a little bit bigger, and the advantage is usually it's mostly would work. And if you want to use some other graphical client, that's completely fine, so long as you can get it to work. But we will not cover how to use them in the module. Okay, and that's it. So that's the reading for today. So that's a chapter from a free book, and this is just the documentation from the MongoDB Atlas. Okay, is there any questions? And yeah, or otherwise I'll see you later during the lab, which will, I think for this week, it's just the questions and answers for the group work, which we'll present next week, I think. Okay, I'll stop there then. Stop.